Welcome to you all that are here live with us, and to those of you who are joining, watching the recording in the Growth Network. Welcome to you all. So I would like to begin by introducing Eleanor. We're going to hear from Eleanor and Judi today. Eleanor will be our first speaker, and Eleanor is a freelance social and therapeutic horticulture practitioner from England, working under her umbrella name, Hope Springs Gardening. She delivers social and therapeutic horticulture sessions in person and online in various sorry in various mental health and grief support settings, as well as in elementary and preschool settings for children with additional social and emotional needs. She has a degree in English literature from the University of Durham, the RHS Level 2 in Practical Horticulture, and a certificate in horticultural therapy from the HTI in the USA. Thank you so much for being here, Eleanor and Judi. I'm going to pass it over to you now, Eleanor.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. It's Friday afternoon, Friday afternoon here in England. It's 5:30 in the evening here, right before Christmas. So thank you so much for joining. It's a real privilege for me to be here and to meet you all virtually. Katie's introduced a little bit about me and what I do. I'm social and therapeutic horticulture practitioner, practicing here in the Cotswolds in England, near a lovely place called Cirencester, capital of the Cotswolds. You can see the Cotswold stone there in my greenhouse in the picture. We were just talking about that. So a beautiful place to live and do this lovely work. So yes, it's threefold, the work that I do. So I'm going to share this on my screen. Here we go. So yes, one of the big pieces that I do is why we're here today, my gardening for grief workshops, which I deliver in person and online, as Katie said. I also work 3 days a week at a beautiful garden in Swindon in Wiltshire called Twigs Community Gardens, which is a social and therapeutic horticulture project that supports people with mental health issues. And it's a charity that's been going for about nearly 30 years now. And we support people with all sorts of different things: anxiety, depression, social isolation. And we also, so I'm there 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I often find that people who are coming to those sessions who might be experiencing those sorts of issues, anxiety, depression, quite often grief is a factor in their experience, and there's something going on with them connected to loss as well. So I find that's a really interesting area of my work. And we also deliver dementia-friendly gardening groups there as well. In fact, we had a beautiful session this morning where we were making wreaths, Christmas wreaths, which was really lovely. So that's a very special part of my work. So yeah, I'm there 3 days a week. And then I also work in primary schools and elementary schools, as you guys might call it, and preschool settings. And again, therapeutic horticulture is a wonderful fit for working for those children. And again, sometimes grief and loss comes up there too, with grandparents that may have died, or aunts and uncles, or those sorts of things. So that has been my experience as well. So I've been able to use that in my work there with those groups too. So really, one of the big pieces I want to share with you today is a personal story about why I think gardening for grief is so important. And it comes from a very profound personal experience. So here, as you can see, is a picture of me with my beautiful daughter, Miranda, and in this beautiful yellow rose next door. And now Miranda was 15 months old, and she died very suddenly and unexpectedly in January 2008. So that's coming up unbelievably 17 years ago, that will be in January. She was a very happy, healthy child, and her loss was a massive, massive trauma and shock to all of me and all of her family, and the single most devastating, horrific experience of my life to date, hands down. Nothing else comes anywhere close. She died in January 2008. It was classified at the time as a SIDS, a sudden infant death, but she was 15 months, so we now understand it to be something called sudden unexplained death in childhood, which affects children between the ages of 1 and 18. I mean, it was a thing I didn't even know happened or existed. So yes, massive, horrific, hideous shock. She died in the January, and going forward into that first year without her, come April, I was still in a lot of pain and shock, really, profound shock, really. And my aunt we were living in West London at the time, and my aunt said she was going to come and visit me. And she was good. She's just one of those brilliant people who turns up and says, right, I'm going to do this. She didn't come and say, what do you need? How can I help you? Which, as we know, if you've been through grief yourself, is exhausting because it just puts the pressure on you. She said, right, I'm going to come. We're going to sort out your garden, Eleanor. So my house backed onto the park in West London, and the garden was quite well cared for. But I had small children. I was being so busy with them, so it was a bit of a mess. So she said, right, come on, we're going to sort this out. The rose that you see in the picture there was a beautiful David Austin rose, which is a colour with a yellow colour there, called the Molyneux rose, and it had been given to Miranda for her baptism the year before by her godfather, and it's a very special rose to us, obviously now as well. But it represents the her dad is a Wolverhampton Wanderers football fan or soccer fan, as you guys might say, and the home ground in Wolverhampton is called Molyneux. And David Austin Roses has their main warehouse there, and that's where the company was born and comes from. So that rose was given to Miranda for her baptism, and of course, assumed huge significance after Miranda died, even more so. But it was in a pot, it wasn't doing very much. So my aunt came over, she said, right, we're going to plant this rose. So we worked really hard in the garden that day, and it was April. And I found as well, going into that new season after Miranda had died, I found that incredibly painful and incredibly difficult because it felt like the world was moving forwards when all I wanted to do was stop or go backwards. And the changing of the season when you're in that zone is actually a really difficult thing to have to navigate. But there was something about being out in the garden that day. And I enjoyed gardening before. I'd gardened with my grandma. I'd done bits and pieces over the years, but it's something about being out there that day. We dug in the ground, we worked, we uh, we cleared beds, we weeded, we sorted stuff out, we planted that special rose. And I remember that day feeling something had shifted a little bit. I just felt a little bit lighter in my body and my brain. Felt physically tired. I felt mentally more peaceful. Didn't make any of these connections till way down the line, but it was something shifted in me that day. And so therefore the garden after that took on a huge amount of significance for me. And that summer, spring and summer, I was out there a lot. I was gardening, I was nurturing, I was growing things, I was looking after stuff, as well as my son, who was a little bit older than Miranda at the time. He was 3.5 when she died. And he used to come and help me sometimes too. But it was a really noticeable thing for me to do that I found very healing, very helpful, very peaceful. And also I felt safe there. And I think also when you have been experienced something traumatic as the death of a child, um, everything goes out of the window in terms of your how you feel about the control you have over your life or your space or anything like that. And nature, I was so angry with Mother Nature. I was angry with the sun for shining. I was angry with the seasons for changing. I was angry for people with going on with their lives. And something about being in the garden in that safe space and being able to connect with nature again, but at my own speed and my own pace by looking after things and participating in and with nature, which we all know now the science tells us as well, was really healing and really helpful. So fast forward, so all of those pieces. I would never have been able to articulate to you at that point, 17 years ago or 16 years ago, that that's what the garden was doing for me, but it absolutely was. Fast forward, we ended up moving out to America and living in the States for a while through my children's dad's work. And I've continued to garden out there. And oh, sorry, I haven't shown you this lovely photo. This is the photo of my little boy and the garden that I grew that summer. So that's spring and summer. That's the picture of the garden. You can just about see the yellow roses there at the back, and the nasturtiums and the cosmos and the verbena that I still grow a lot here in my garden now in the Cotswolds. But there's my little boy now. He's 20. He's coming back from college tonight. Okay, so fast forward, we ended up in America for a little bit. Madison, New Jersey, and I started a vegetable garden in my children's school, which was a great experience. And then we ended up living down in Dallas, in Texas. And while we were in Texas, I was working in the school garden at my daughter's school. I met this wonderful woman called Sandra, who'd done the horticultural therapy training program with the HTI. Here she is with the blonde hair leaning over into the flower beds here. She had set up this program at a homeless shelter in downtown Dallas at the Stew Pot, which was supporting people experiencing homelessness using horticultural therapy. And she'd done that training, she'd done that qualification with the HTI. And I remember when we'd moved to Dallas in the first place thinking, I'm just going to try and do this properly. And then I met Sandra. It was like a special moment of like, oh my goodness, this is a real thing. So I enrolled, did my training with the HTI while we were in the States, my master gardener, and then fast forward again, came back to England in the summer of 2019, just before lockdown and COVID hit. And my after COVID, did my RHS training and started with my dream of this business, Hope Springs Gardening, which would always be my dream, but particularly to support people who are experiencing grief, because by now I'd joined all those dots about why the garden had helped me so much after Miranda died, and I wanted to pay that forward, really. So that's a little bit about my personal story, which I do find time and time again when I talk to people about why I do what I do, when I deliver my workshops, when I do this work. It really feels so impactful to be able to share a personal story if you are able to, if you've had that experience yourself, and especially something around the loss of a child or a baby. If you're the person that's standing up in front of a group of people saying, I've had this experience, I'm not saying that gardening is the be all and end all, or it's the answer to all your prayers, or it's going to make grief any better, but it's something you can do that might alleviate the symptoms or just help you a little bit in some capacity. And I think there's something about somebody who's been there themselves, is able to share that experience professionally, that has been very impactful and powerful. And it's certainly my experience of the work that I do, and it's a privilege to do it. And I would also say, add to that as well, that it's by connecting and doing this work that I still continue to feel closest to Miranda, and I continue to mother her through this work, because that's the piece, isn't it? That nurturing that we know about, that when we work in the garden, that is so healing and helpful. But for me, it's about continuing to mother her in that way. So that's how, and it's a privilege for me to share her with you. So why is gardening good for grief? Okay, so here's what we know about grief. And certainly this is very true of my own personal experience, and I'm not sure whether any of you can relate to this as well. But many people report this feeling of feeling very stuck, very isolated in their feelings. I certainly felt like that. And there's this obsession, isn't there, about wanting people to move on, wanting people to fix it, people wanting you to be better, people wanting you to move past what's happened, or just being awkward about talking about that person that's died, for example. And so people feeling stuck in that, because there's this place where you want to be in that sadness and in that grief, but you don't know how to articulate that necessarily. And that can be very isolating and very lonely and impact our mental health. There's that feeling of everyday living, feeling completely insurmountable when you're experiencing grief. Going to the shops, taking my son to school was just an ordeal. Getting out of bed, all these kind of basic things that you have to do to function day to day when you're living with that overwhelming grief can be very, very, very debilitating. Anger was a huge piece for me. I was just furious, and I was so angry with the world. I was angry with everyone else's children for still being alive, and mine wasn't. And it's a very uncomfortable, horrible feeling if you're not used to those powerful emotions. Loss of hope, loss of control. We've talked a little bit about that already. And again, we know that grief has a huge impact on our mental health. And as I was saying, a lot of the people that come to Twigs for us for a variety of reasons are certainly struggling with anxiety and depression, for example, but also that can often be linked to grief that's maybe not been processed properly, all that kind of stuff. Physical health issues, certainly that was something else I could relate to as well. Nobody really told me that grief would be so utterly exhausting. Somebody said to me, it's like being run over by a bus, and it did feel physically like I'd been punched, really. And also this weight on my chest where I felt like I couldn't breathe, really. So either breathlessness or that kind of pressure here, which felt very, very strange and peculiar. And again, so here's what we know about grief, but here's why gardening helps to, in my experience, and what I like to share with other people, why it's helpful for people who are in that place. So how gardening can be helpful. So absolutely, we often find with tasks in the garden or with therapeutic horticulture in general, those mindful, peaceful, repetitive activities, for example, processing seed or anything that's kind of repetitive, keeps going over and over and over again, that is calms that busyness in your brain, but also the noise in your brain and the sadness really as well, which can be just overwhelming. So that mindfulness, and being in the present moment as well. We obviously all know a lot about that.
Civic address for Lenore Cedar.
Whilst we're in the garden, that's how we can feel. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about this restoring those connections with rhythm.
Sorry, Eleanor, I think you've been muted. Maybe Katie might have muted you. Katie, I was hoping you could mute the other
Okay, can you all
person,
hear
but
me
yeah.
again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So I've talked a little bit about the restoring those connections with the rhythm and the patterns of the life cycle. When somebody dies, that is obviously, as that saying, is completely interrupted, that journey. But it's also something about the acceptance of that, especially around the death of a child, which feels so upside down, where black is white and white is black. It's just completely wrong. If it, as a parent, certainly when you find that you've outlived your child. So there's something about the disconnect from nature when you're so angry with nature, as it were. But by working in and with it in the garden and restoring those connections by growing things, by working in the soil, that can be incredibly healing and helpful. Big piece for me, obviously, is why I'm called Hope Springs Gardening, providing hope for the future. I mean, it's a very simple and obvious, but such a powerful thing. And I find it time and again, especially when I do my activity with the bulbs or the seeds, where you're sowing something for the future. And it's a physical representation of that hope for the future, that better times will come, like that famous quote, Audrey Hepburn quote, to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. And especially, I think, when you're in such a terrible, dark, difficult place and you can't necessarily think about a future without the person that you've loved in it, there's something about being able to, almost like a sidestep to a little bit of a sidestep in a way, which I'll talk a little bit about later on in this slide, where you're able to think about the future gently and kindly by investing, by planting a seed or a bulb in the soil that might come up in a few months' time, and be able to look back and say, okay, I did that then and I felt this way, but now I'm 6 months down the line. Doesn't mean you're better, but it's just that journey. There's so many opportunities in gardening and horticulture for metaphor, about hope for the future, as we've just been talking about there, but also that physical, practical work we've talked about. So it's not just the peaceful, mindful activities, it's those stronger digging activities, if you're physically able to do that, that can get that body shaking and moving and just feel a bit more away and disconnected from that pressure and claustrophobia of grief, really. So here's a quote I use, which I hope sums all of that up. So grief can be honored and absorbed. Often we memorialize people when we're doing this work as well, and you're planting something in memory of somebody, but it's a safe and manageable way that's both a sidestep to and a reflection of personal pain. Here we go. Back on here again. So a little bit about practical stuff about the workshops that I do. Conscious time's running out. The workshops, for example, the two big workshops that I do are at bereavement retreats for parents that have lost a child, who come for the weekend and do some work, some yoga, some mindfulness, connect with other parents. And then I come along and do my demonstration. I share a personal story, as I have with you today, which again is very impactful in my experience. I demonstrate what we're going to do, and then they all come to their little pre-prepared workstations. And the bulb lasagna activity is a wonderful one to do for this, especially if we're doing it in October, when the bulbs will come up in the spring. There's an informal discussion as we work, questions and answers, and a follow-up on social media if people are keen to ask more questions. The online workshops surprisingly work better than you'd think. I've done that with a group called the Worst Girl Gang Ever, which is a miscarriage platform for supporting people who've been through miscarriage or baby loss. And that's worked quite well online, actually. Seed sowing I've done with that. Very similar activity to the ones I've done for the bereavement retreats. But in my own home, I did a propagation workshop with that group as well. Goals. So here's where we talk about the goals for doing gardening with grief. So reducing those feelings of isolation, anxiety, and powerlessness, promoting a sense of hope for the future, that shared experience of loss, time and again, that comes up again and again with the groups that I work with, that just especially with bereaved parents, that somebody else is in this awful club. Collaboration, community, and that restoration as well. Again, connecting with the hope for the future. Outcomes, the way I've measured it so far has been quite low key, so it's not so structured, but I'm working on that piece. So feedback forms and social media interactions are the reasons how I've got the feedback so far, or sometimes people will get in touch with me and say, "Oh, my bulbs are coming up, and what do I do next?" and that kind of thing, which is lovely. And then this is my piece that I'm going to finish with at the end. So this is Watch This Space. So this is the Garden of Hope at Twigs, which is where I work. So this has been built, as you can see, from this not very nice space with this horrible metal fence at the back. We've cleared it, we've built beds, there's landscaping, we've had funding. And the plan is, all being well, fingers crossed in March, that I will be delivering bereavement support sessions at Twigs as part of the sort of umbrella of the Twigs community, the mental health piece, to support people who are going through a bereavement. So that will be my first time doing something like that as part of Twigs and so working with different groups of people, because up to now it's been very much about baby loss and child loss. So this will be a different venture for me, but I'm really excited about it and hopeful for the future. So I think that's me wrapping up. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation, my talk, and if anybody who wants to ask me any questions or talk to me about anything else, very happy to answer.
Thank you so, Eleanor. That was incredible. So moving, so personal, so informational as well. Thank you so much. I know I'm sure there was not a dry eye in the room at moments there. I really appreciate you sharing your story with all of us.
My pleasure. Lovely for me to talk about her.
Thank you, Eleanor. So we're definitely going to do some Q&A at the end with both Judi and Eleanor, but for now, I'm going to pass it over to Judi. I'm going to do a little introduction here. So Judi Vinni is a co-founder and coordinator at Willow Springs in Thunder Bay, Ontario. She studied horticultural therapy with Mitchell Houston, and her work focuses on art, therapeutic gardening, and food making. Judi uses willow, driftwood, and everlastings to create sculpture, furniture, and garden features, and has been a teacher of willow furniture making for 26 years. Judi is driven by the power of the creative process combined with the amazing benefits of interacting with nature and how collaborations can result in unexpected, life-changing results. And I've had the honor of knowing Judi for a few years now, and always a pleasure to hear from Judi. So thank you, Judi, for being here as well. And I would recommend following both Judi and Eleanor on Instagram. We'll make sure we put those in the chat later. Such wonderful Instagrams they both have to keep up with. So I'm going to now pass it over to Judi's video.
I'm Judi Vinni, the coordinator of Willow Springs Creative Centre just outside Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario. I have a diverse background that includes schooling as an athletic therapist, certified life skills coach, heavy equipment operator, visual artist, willow furniture maker, adult educator, and coach. I worked for 10 years as a coordinator of the Northwestern Ontario Women's Health Information Network and 10 years as the coordinator and primary instructor in the Women in Trades and Technology program at Confederation College. In 2000, 3 of my friends and I formed Willow Springs Artisan Gift Store and Studio that eventually evolved into Willow Springs Creative Centre, a progressive, not-for-profit offering nature-based art, therapeutic gardening, and food programming in an inclusive, accessible way. I've been training in and developing and delivering social and therapeutic horticultural programs for Willow Springs for the past 14 years. I've created home-based accessible gardening programs for adults with physical and intellectual disabilities, social and therapeutic horticultural programs for children and young adults with autism, a horticultural therapy program for Indigenous children and youth in residential treatment centers and correctional facilities. I've offered gardening programs for people in stroke recovery, people with vision loss, and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I wrote and I developed an introduction to horticultural therapy program that we ran at Lakehead University over 6 weeks for people who were looking at integrating horticultural therapy into their university or college education. While training with Mitchell Hewson in 2011, I was introduced to grief gardening as a concept, and I wanted to make this my focus ever since then. How is the community involved in the concept and the implementation of the Morning Garden, our grief gardening program that we are developing? At any time, around 50% of people are actively grieving someone important to them. Helen is an amazing woman I met when working together at a large commercial greenhouse for 2 years when we were in our 20s. In 2014, her 20-year-old son, Mukti, died in a car accident. Her grief was so profound. I would run into her at a local greenhouse close to Willow Springs, where she had retreated in an attempt to cope with her loss. This is when I first conceived of creating a grief garden and program in dedication to Helen. I worked at learning more, integrating grief-related lessons into the different therapeutic gardening programs I was running, especially at the Delico Residential Treatment Center for Indigenous children who had experienced trauma, where I ran a horticultural gardening program for 8 years. The program ended due to COVID and has not resumed, but a lot of learning took place there. Willow Springs began partnering with Hospice Northwest to offer art and gardening programs for their clients about 10 years ago. I began dreaming of developing Willow Springs 2 acres into an ideal space for running a grief gardening program. 7 years ago, Willow Springs lead gardener and one of my best friends, Roxana, lost her son to an accidental overdose. Her son, Elijah, was working at Willow Springs as a gardener for the summer and had just finished work and began his first year of college when he died at the age of 19. I watched as Roxana soothed herself by walking in the woods, creating more gardens, planting beautiful flowers, milkweed, and a special maple tree. The soil, the seeds, the plants were and still are her therapists. I vowed to her family and to her that we would create a grief gardening program, especially for families who have lost someone to issues surrounding addiction. Like so many places in the world, we have a huge drug problem in the Thunder Bay area. This tragedy pushed me even harder towards developing this grief gardening program. Willow Springs Creative Center's board of directors has been very supportive of this initiative, and although it has been a slow go to have a fully functioning grief gardening program running at Willow Springs, we continue to trial run components of the program and integrate lessons and activities into all of our gardening programs until we reach the goal. Willow Springs Gardening Working Group and Garden Crew and summer gardeners have been contributing to the many aspects of the Morning Garden's development. But what makes gardening so effective when working with people who are grieving? I like to think of the 5 ways to well-being, that being connecting, having a support network, to be active, to take notice, that mindfulness quality, being able to learn, and being able to give. The amazing restorative power of gardens and nature can help to meet all 5 of these. Over the years, there have been many theories about grieving, the 7 steps, the 5 stages. The areas that you look at are the shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. At Willow Springs, we look at it that everyone's grieving is different and individualized, and there isn't a real order to the steps or stages of grieving. What we know is that gardening can bring a sense of peace, calm, or relaxation, feelings of safety and security, increased social contact, inclusion, and a sense of belonging. If someone can plant and tend to a plant, this can help them to feel in control of a situation at a time when they may feel they have no control of anything in their life. Here are some of the components that we are working to include in our garden space to allow the grief gardening program to be successful. We want to emphasize the metaphor of the meandering cyclical movement of life, and it would be lovely to do it with a water feature, but we don't have that. So what we've created is a pathway that moves throughout our whole property. I just wanted to say that our work at Willow Springs has been greatly influenced by the work of Valerie Thomas's, and she studied and analyzed therapeutic gardens that had been developed for grieving children. You want an ease of mobility throughout the garden, and you also want sitting spots where people could sit together or where a person could sit alone, yet observe others in the garden space. You also want a place where someone could safely hide, especially a child. Say, like in a beanpole teepee. At Willow Springs, we have an accessible tree house, which is a wonderful, quiet, safe place for someone to hide. We've also constructed a living willow dome, which acts as a nice little hiding spot. Throughout the property, we have included a variety of different ways to garden. We have raised beds, accessible beds, lots of different containers, and containers that maybe people choose that mean something to them. These are my dad's last work boots. We work hard to provide many little fascinations, these little bits of magic, these little special things that are enough to distract someone and give them a moment where they feel that they've been transported somewhere else. And they're interesting enough that they take up the space within a person's mind. And for that small moment, they are relieved of the pain of grieving. And they can escape a part of their life that is present but not always preferred. People often withdraw when they're grieving. So within our gardening programs, we encourage group work and we set comfortable places for people to gather and sit, do programming, share food, cook food, and often there is the positive result of people connecting and being able to form into a supportive group.
in lots of our programming, we talk about how essential support is to help people heal. And we build willow obelisks, arbors, and trellises, and then plant plants to grow up them. And when people see how the support is helping the plants, they can relate to their own lives and see the necessity for support.
Just being amongst trees can make a person feel supported and safe. The pollinator garden provides those moments of fascination as well, while observing bees, butterflies, and other insects. We use the monarch butterfly's story as a metaphor for transformation, resilience, and beauty. Providing opportunities to smash things, hit something with a hammer, make something and then destroy it, can help release anger, stress, and tension. We have a large sand pile with building blocks that young people gravitate to. They build and they dig and then they break their creations. We set up smashing stations and have people break cracked terracotta pots, ceramic tiles, stained glass. We use these pieces as fillers in the bottom of containers, as well as creating beautiful mosaic art. We incorporate flower pounding art activities into sessions that people have said lets them get out a lot of tension. We make beautiful prayer flags we can hang in the garden with their work. The noise can be a trigger for some people, so it is important to be aware. But sound is important in the garden, so we include wind chimes throughout our woodland paths. We also have our greenhouse, potting benches, a tool shed. We have many large working tables. We have fruit trees and shrubs, vegetable gardens, and many native and cultivated perennials that can be tended, pruned, deadheaded, and cut for use in lessons. We have wildflower fields and herb gardens. A wind phone is an element we want to include this summer in an area we are creating called the Secret Garden. The Secret Garden will be tucked away down a path. It will have a gated entrance and a place for a person to sit, an altar-like area where people can place objects, gifts, or symbols of connection to their loved ones. Here's where we'll install the wind phone. A basic telephone will be attached to a tree and with a small awning around it. As wind phones do all around the world, it will provide a way for someone who is grieving an opportunity to talk to their special person, to say what they need to say, to share memories, say goodbyes, and release them into the wind. Adding an element of water, even a small bird bath, will bring soothing energy into your garden. The water represents fluidity, movement, creativity, renewal, healing, and transformation. Water allows for reflection. Water is essential for the garden, as it is for us. The symbolisms of wood, stone, colors, insects, flowers, and trees can provide touchstones and comfort to people who are grieving. Butterflies, dragonflies, daisies, roses, clovers, forget-me-nots, these are popular symbols we have observed. Try to include these in your garden. And just a quick note on planting specific plants or trees in memory of a person. Plants don't always survive, and most memory or memorial gardens now do not identify individual trees or plants for a person any longer, because a person could return to the garden later and find that their memory plant is gone. Are there specific plants we use in our garden? Yes, for sure. Heritage roses, milkweed, vegetables like colorful, multicolored carrots, potatoes, fresh greens. Lilacs are so important. It's a shrub that grows everywhere in northwestern Ontario. Herbs like basil and lavender. Flowers like sunflowers, peonies, sweet peas, morning glory. Berry plants, evergreens, cedar, maples, cornflowers. The list is endless, but they are hardy plants to northwestern Ontario. And our main mentor is willow, our namesake, for its flexibility, its tenacity, its beauty, its strength, its accessibility, and its adaptability. Let's take a look at a year of lessons in the morning garden. Spring, a garden tour and journal making, seed planting and learning about compost and the transformation, willow trellis making, supporting one another, and transplanting seedlings and learning to harden them off. Each participant creates their own journal at the beginning of the program. Summer, we'll start with building a raised bed and planting up vegetables, planting containers, smashing pots, and doing some mosaic work. Pollinator garden, weeding, planting the milkweed, and hearing about the monarch's story, and finishing off with some memorial and everlasting flower arrangements. Creating a collaborative flower arrangement can be a very powerful exercise. I have each person choose a flower or piece of greenery that means something to them in relationship to the person they've lost. And one by one, they take turns adding them to a large vase. They're able to say something about their loved one if they'd like, or just remain silent. It's a very, very moving exercise. Autumn. We'll start with seed saving, especially the tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, milkweed, and sunflowers. And then we tell Elijah's story and create some ephemeral art. We plant garlic and make pizza with a garlic sauce and finish off with apple picking and make apple cider and apple pie. At Willow Springs, we have always found making and sharing food together as a very important part of supporting one another. And then comes winter. We'll make bird feeders and edible bird food ornaments to decorate a tree. We'll make a fresh evergreen wreath. We'll create potpourri from horticultural material we've been collecting over the year, and we'll dive into some scents and stimulate our memories. And we'll make some beautiful natural dyed and flower pounded prayer flags that can be hung. In closing, I would just like to say what an honor it is to do this type of work and interact with all the people who are a part of Willow Springs and the ever-expanding practice of horticultural therapy and therapeutic gardening. I hope you were able to take something from this presentation, and I will continue to post updates about our ever-evolving grief garden and the morning garden program. Please feel free to contact me through this email or our website. Thanks so much.
I would like to say a very heartfelt thank you to Judi and Eleanor for sharing their stories and expertise with us today. This has been a really special and powerful webinar, and you have both given us a lot to reflect on and many practical ideas for implementing grief gardening into our work. Thank you again, and thank you to everyone who joined live and is watching the recording. Please feel free to share any of your thoughts in the peer support forum in the Growth Network. This wraps up our Growth Network guest speaker events for 2024, but we look forward to seeing you back in 2025 for some exciting events. Feel free to check out the events tab in the Growth Network to learn more.